One of the things that I love to ask when I've got a panel of farmers and they're doing great things is, do you have any regrets or anything you wish you knew before you started out on this? And everyone always gives exactly the same answer. And that is, I wish I did a benchmarking of a carbon audit benchmark. And because actually they realised that they've a huge amount of carbon already and they've got their profitability, they can measure that. But what we haven't done is that first benchmarking of the carbon to really capture all the true reductions. And they sort of feel excited about what it would have been.
Welcome to Boots Off, Log On, a podcast where we talk all things farm business. A show about the business of farming, bringing you insights and wisdom from the leaders in farm business, helping you minimise risk and maximise return on all your hard work. I'm David, and I'll be your host for the show.
G'day everybody, and welcome again to the podcast. In this episode, I have the privilege of interviewing Natalie Collard, the newly appointed CEO of Farmers for Climate Action. Farmers for Climate Action is the fastest growing farmer representative organisation in Australia, with 8,000 farmer members and a non-farming supporter base of over 45,000 people. Natalie has an extraordinary background as an advocate for rural Australia, agriculture, renewable energy, innovation and women's leadership. But what truly sets her apart is her dedication to driving change in the realm of climate action, particularly within the farming community. During this insightful conversation, we explore Natalie's journey and her personal connection to agriculture. She shares her insights into the role and origins of Farmers for Climate Action, a movement dedicated to championing climate policies and sustainable practices within the farming community. Natalie dives into the shifting perceptions of farmers in the media, as well as the support her organisation has garnered both within the agriculture community and beyond. She delves into the collaborative efforts with farmer representative bodies and the profound benefits of renewable energy for farmers and their communities. For those involved in animal agriculture, Natalie discusses how Farmers for Climate Action defends its environmental impact. And the conversation takes a candid turn as Natalie addresses the question of why it's not hypocritical for farmers to advocate for climate action, given its perceived role in its contributor to emissions. Breaking down the barriers with farming communities and forging political advocacy for climate action are also integral parts of this engaging discussion. We discover how Farmers for Climate Action is working to influence political leaders and support farmers who feel helpless in the face of climate change. For those eager to get involved, Natalie provides valuable insights into where to begin, highlights farmer education resources and shares future goals for Farmers for Climate Action. Moreover, we debunk myths surrounding farmers and climate action, shedding light on the complex reality of their work. Natalie's passion and commitment are truly inspirational, and in a delightful twist, we get to know her on a personal level as she shares her interests outside of work. This episode is a must-listen for anyone looking to gain a deeper understanding of climate action within the farming industry, and how a passionate advocate like Natalie Collard is leading the way towards a sustainable and resilient future. Now over to Natalie. Welcome to the podcast, Natalie.
David, fantastic to be here. Thank you.
Now, we were just talking off air. Now, you're the newly minted CEO of Farmers for Climate Action, so congratulations on your new job.
Thanks. I'm just so excited to be in this role, working with amazing people, doing something that is, we think, the most important challenge of our time, tackling it head on. But I have to say, I'm feeling very wet behind the ears as we start, lots to learn and lots of impact to have.
So now you're on a podcast. I'm going to ask you questions and you'll think, gosh, I hope I've read everything in my induction.
Oh, you know how it is. Yeah.
So look, let's talk about, you've got a really impressive CV. Look, you've been an advocate for rural and regional Australia for a while. You've done work in renewable energy innovations. You've done quite a bit in women's leadership in your career as well. Are you from a rural background yourself, or do you just find this affinity with agriculture throughout your career?
Would you believe the millennial drought brought me to agriculture unexpectedly? City girl, born and raised on the wrong side of the tracks in Melbourne, went to Canberra. I did the Army Reserves when I was at uni, and that led me to Defence as a civilian, and DFAT. Loved both of those so much. But I was living in Canberra and we couldn't have showers, couldn't wash the car. And I thought, what can I do to help farmers? The news was telling me this was impacting farmers far worse than it was impacting me. So I knocked on the door of the Farmers Federation and I said, what can I do to help? And I thought maybe host a barbecue, fundraise, some pro bono work. And they said, would you apply for this job? I did. Would you believe I won the job? And it was Manager Rural Affairs. And I remember telling my parents, because I'm the daughter of migrants, so the great Aussie dream was to get a secure job in the public service. And when they found out I'd kicked it in just as long service leave had sort of started to roll in, and doing something that was not in their world or my world, what that meant was we were sort of thrown through a loop. So Dad said to me, have you ever been on a farm, Nat? And I said, no. And he said, have you ever met a farmer? And I said, I think there was one on the interview, Dad. But what I learned was that farmers are just simply fantastic. They're really generous, sharing their knowledge. And what I'm really good at is asking lots of questions and really open to learn. So it's something that I've stuck with and absolutely loved.
So your parents didn't come from farming stock at all either?
No, Dad was grew up in Mauritius, Mum and Dad. Dad was involved in a homestead that had sugarcane, but they weren't directly involved in anything but the management, through his grandfather. So it wasn't something that we felt that we came from.
Oh, very good. So when you got into your first agricultural role, what was the biggest? I love the idea of, those fresh eyes. I always say when someone joins our organisation, you have like these 3 months probably where you just see the place for what it is, rather than you haven't gone native yet. And so, you're really just, everything's new and everything's just as you see it. So when you first joined ag, what surprised you really the first time?
Well, I will say coming completely new is really overwhelming, but really exciting. And I'm always someone that's been attracted to transformational things. That felt incredibly exciting. The big thing for me was just the things that ag didn't realise was completely different to the world that I came from. Like, there was not a great distinction between home life and work life, because we would have work meetings around kitchen tables, and you'd get to know people's families and things like that. So you'd have to understand who people were and where they came from, which was to me really similar to values that I've been raised with. It's about who are you, what are you here to do in the world, and will you do it the right way? So for me, that felt a really strong point of connection, but it's not something that people I was working with would probably notice. The other thing for me was that I remember being just blown away that people in agriculture, to my way of thinking, had to be almost, as skilled as veterinarians on their livestock, as skilled as lawyers on navigating, regulatory regimes, as skilled as accountants to run financials, and really polish their reputational management and communication, because every single person they spoke to had an investment or skin in the game with their product, because we're talking about, meat, vegetables, fruits, and fibre as well. So I remember just feeling really blown away and slightly intimidated at the skill set that people had to have just to turn up to be a farmer, let alone managing staff and all the rest. And they just oblivious about how impressive I found that, to the point where it actually took me about 6 months to mention it.
Right. I think someone asked me the other day, what would you say to a year 10? I was doing a podcast actually, and they said, what would you say to a year 10 student? And one of the things obviously people always talk about is that I want to get bored at work. And I said, if you never want to get bored at work, go to ag, because it's like every job in one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just sort of think there's something for everybody. And I really do believe it. And one of the things that I notice that people have a fear about ag, especially if they haven't come from it, is they think that once you go into ag, you can never get out. And what I found is it's an industry with the most transferable skills ever. So I came in, and what I found as well was that I had a skill set that was needed and really valued and appreciated. And where I came from, I was one of many. And in ag, everyone brought something different to the table, and we really appreciated each other for it. And I felt really listened to and valued, and that I could make a big difference. It never had felt more important to make sure I was doing my job to the absolute best that I could, because there wasn't all these layers of bureaucracy on top of me, and people were trusting me. And that's something I think that people that really want to make a difference, this was before diverse teams were in vogue. We were using it already and being better because of it from the get-go. So that was really exciting for me.
Yeah, definitely. And so, and you've said that, because if I look at your LinkedIn profile, you have actually had this ability to move in and out of, you've had some pretty big roles in agribusiness, but you've been able to move in and out of ag without being, I was expecting to have this solid agribusiness career from 20 through, which is quite normal. But you've been able to move in and out a bit.
Yeah, I feel that I'm always attracted to jobs that give me something that's in the first 5 news items in the paper or on the news. And I've always been able to do that. And it's not something that I consciously set out to do. It's just that I'm really purpose-driven. I'm really passionate. I really love working, so I give it my all. And so I want to do something that feels like I'm making a difference. And what that means, I've since I came into ag, and I grew there really quickly. I went from a manager role to a CEO, which people just wouldn't believe, given I was so new to the sector. But then from there, I went to telecommunications, clean energy. I did a whole lot of stuff with startups, which was really fun. I did transport. And then back to ag, but as a startup, and now back to ag, a non-traditional national big body like Farmers for Climate Action.
Yeah, so that's a good you helped me with my segue there. So Farmers for Climate Action. So for all our listeners who don't know about or haven't heard about Farmers for Climate Action, can you give us an overview of the organisation and how did it come about and just give us the pitch, I suppose.
Sure. Well, about 8 years ago, a group of farmers got together in the Blue Mountains, famously, and some are still on our board, would you believe? And they sort of said, we're in a world where we were talking about the millennial drought, which at the time was considered a 1 in 100-year drought. But since then, we've had many more droughts and flood events across Australia. We've got global warming. The science is in, but not enough is being done. And we're on the front line of, wanting to solve that problem and investing serious dollars and time and expertise to do so. But also, we're on the front line of the impact. So we're an industry that actually is threatened first if we don't solve this as a country and also as a planet. So they decided to come together and create what I believe is Australia's most contemporary farmer representational peak body. It's already become the second largest Australian farmer representative group by membership. We've got just over 8,000 members now, but we've got a supporter network of 45,000 non-farmers that really believe in what we do and support us to do that. So really what FCA is about there's 5 strategic goals, and it's all about what we can do to create meaningful climate action. And of that climate action, we're thinking, what can we do at the national level? What can we do to shift national legislation and the political appetite so that as a country, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet and setting the same goals and targets. We think it's incredibly important for Australia to get some alignment at the national level about what we're doing and why. Our theory of change, we call it, is that we believe if we grow the number of farmers, the representatives in our communities that are leading on climate smart farming solutions, if we're able to champion strong economy-wide climate policy, and that's where national legislative change comes in, we think that we can be working together to mitigate climate change and benefit rural communities at both ends of the spectrum. So through our own efforts and through national benchmarks and activities as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting because you look in, I suppose, traditional media over the past, well, ever really, but it's changing a bit lately. But, farmers are often portrayed as part of the problem rather than, or apathetic in their concerns about climate change. And do you think this is a changing narrative, or do you think it's a way to go? So if you talk to the average consumer on the street, they don't often see climate action and farming in the same boat. Is that changing, or do you think it's got a way to go?
Well, I've been, as you know, around agriculture for 20 years, directly and indirectly, and it sort of breaks my heart that actually most people, if you spoke to the average person on the street, they would say to you that the first thing that they could do for climate action is actually cut a whole food group's diet because they believe farmers are doing the wrong thing, and they're not aware that actually, for instance, the red meat industry has a carbon neutral by 2050 benchmark that they're making huge inroads towards. There's not many sectors that are as advanced as the food industry in terms of addressing climate action. We're always looking to do better, though.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. So, look, many of the people listening to this and our clients are in animal agriculture. That's a great point. And they seem to be always having to defend animal agriculture around that common, I suppose, opinion around our animal agriculture. So how are you helping farmers, and especially particularly that group of farmers, better either adapt or educate or all of the above to make animal agriculture part of the solution rather than this perceived part of the problem?
Yeah, well, what I will say is in the first instance, even those farmers, and there's not a huge amount, there's plenty to become members, but there's plenty that aren't connected yet with FCA. We hope they will be. But farmer in Australia is working towards climate action. And under each commodity group, there are very strong sustainability frameworks that are robust, that are working towards very serious benchmarks that are aligned to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. As Farmers for Climate Action, we want to take that further. And we're the only agricultural group that is consistently investing in farmers. We do that in a number of ways. And part of what we're doing is supporting farmers to champion strong economy-wide climate policies, but also to pursue climate-smart agriculture so that they're really positioned to be resilient through the climate change that is hitting them today. For instance, some of the things we do is we've funded over 20 farmers a year to do a scholarship, which includes carbon benchmarking of their farms, being really strong and doing qualifications through the University of Melbourne and Canberra University, ANU, on becoming very up-to-date and understanding the theory and how they can apply that to their farms. We work with farmers and support them to showcase what they're doing to each other. So on our website, we've got a huge number of Farms in Focus where we communicate to other farmers best practice and what's working in different parts of the country. We know that farmers learn from other farmers really well, and they really are a source of trusted advice for each other. So we try and strengthen those communities. We commission reports. So I'm sitting with one called Farm Powered, which is talking about renewables and farming and how they work together, but also how we can benefit, but also how we navigate challenges in that intersection. We also create what we call farmer ambassadors, so that farmers can be trained to have up-to-date information, all the science and the facts, so that they're able to communicate to their local influencers, to each other, MPs and other decision makers around what they need from a really informed perspective.
Do you find there's a barrier? So I grew up so I'm a bit older, so I'm in my early 50s. And so the when I was in my 20s and growing up, the idea of farmers being involved in climate activism was unthought of, really. You couldn't imagine it. And not that they weren't already. So land care's always been a really big part of most farmers' lives. But climate activism beyond the farm gate wasn't really a big thing. Do you find that there's still those barriers within farming? Like they learn from each other, but farming groups or farming communities to be, like you say, an influence or proactively say, no, I'm actually advocating for this, I'm supporting this, I'm pushing this. Especially in I suppose, what are the leader group, which is probably the plus 40 on, to really be proud to say, no, I'm a farmer and I'm standing up and I'm pushing for climate activism, rather than seeing it as, something that hippies did in the 70s. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, especially when you're talking climate. The climate followed by the word activism does conjure up thoughts of antisocial behaviour, or behaviour to get attention and make a point that often doesn't fit with most farmers' values about being constructive in society and part of society. What we recognise is farmers, just like any other group in this country, are very diverse and hold a lot of different opinions and different preferences and ways of working. There's 2 points that I think are really important to put forward here. And one is that farmers have never been busier because the way that the businesses are operating, because of the challenge of climate, whether it be drought after drought interspersed by floods, COVID, labour shortages. Nearly every person in agriculture is working far more than one full-time equivalent job as one individual, and has been for a very long time. So we've got a really motivated group, but we've got a time poor cohort as well. So it's really important for us to make sure that we're offering a suite of measures that suit people and meet them where they're at. So, for instance, if it's us supporting you to send an email to your local MP, we are more than able to do that. If it's on-farm improvements, well, people will head to our website and get a Climate Smart toolkit. I was in Euroa last Thursday, and we had a group of farmers at the local pub, and we came to them and had a really lovely evening where we brought an expert to talk about best practice electrification on farm, how we can upgrade everything from motorbikes to handheld tools to microgrids and batteries on farm to EVs, and had a really energising discussion around what the opportunities are for them, affordability, no question off the table, as well as things that might take 6 months or more, such as new qualifications. So we're really conscious one size does not fit all. The way we operate is always transparent, with integrity and informed by science. So we're never going to stay away from that. We're never going to be antisocial. We don't think that affects the people that we represent. But we're really excited to be collaborative, to be inclusive, to be respectful, and to listen and get feedback around what's working, what's not working. We often get feedback that a bit more extension would be desired. We'd absolutely love to do it. It requires funding, but we're open to exploring how and when that might work in the future.
And you're talking about there's this mix between, I want to talk about, there's obviously a political or representative role here, but I just wanted to drill down a bit on that practical stuff. So often, farmers by necessity and by nature tend to be very much, okay, that's all great, Natalie, but what can I do? They're very action driven. So, which is great. So when it comes down to things like, I've interviewed a few people on carbon farming. You've obviously got electrification, and then you've got the challenges around fueling large equipment like tractors and harvesters, etc., into the future. And so when I'm a farmer and I'm thinking, okay, I've got a machinery replacement schedule over the next 10 years. How do I factor in things like carbon or energy transformation into my machinery replacement schedule when there might be a bit of uncertainty around what's coming down the food chain in the context of machinery? So do you get involved in that, or do you support industry in that way, or do you help farmers do the research? Do you get involved in that practical end of the?
What we see ourselves where we can really make a difference is create and connect experts or people active in this space with a good track record to farmers. So, for instance, we might bring a webinar on a topic with a few different people that are trusted and we've vetted to give their insights and opinions and carry that discussion. One of the best things we do is connect farmers to other farmers. We're already doing it and trying it and share what's for them. And of course, that comes with also sharing all the avenues they've gone down, which haven't quite paid off, and why, because that's just as valuable as the things that have worked. I'll be spending the next 2 days in Yass talking soils and regenerative agriculture with some experts in that space. I'll be listening and learning. But part of what I'll be doing is keeping my ear to the ground around who might be interested and suitable to connect our group of farmers to in the future. And part of our job, I think, is to curate, but also to recognise and be honest that actually it would be terrific if there was a website that said, here's all the people that do this and they're trusted. And we truly, like I think every other part of Australia, including government, we actually don't have the resources to vet and be sure about who we're bringing. But what we can do is make sure that we're creating the right discussions, the right questions to ask, and giving farmers enough of an insight so that when they're in their local community, they can actually connect with great suppliers, ask the right questions, and explore things that will minimise the time that they have to spend researching themselves and lead them towards climate smart. And always it ends up being more profitable solutions more quickly.
Yeah. And I think though, and if you go into any district around Australia, probably around the world, most people are going to know those farmers in their district. They were the first ones to adopt a lot of technology. So let's say they're on grain farming. They were the first ones to go no-till, or they were the first ones to, put in, like you said, regenerative or farming practices, or, they were the first ones to have low stock handling, or, those sort of things. So every district has those farmers that are working on the edge of what's new. So is it about trying to find not only experts, industry experts, as in academic experts, but also those farmers in each district, so everyone knows, okay, those are the guys that always tend to be near the bleeding edge of what's possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually look at the supply chain, so actually talk to some of the providers as well and have them in the room, because often they know the questions that farmers have been asking that haven't actually been solved yet, or what's actually made a great difference. And often with new tech, new ways of education, you get those real gold, unexpected dividends that actually need to be shared as well. So actually having that whole lens is great.
So talking about the supply chain, that's a really good point. So I was at a conference, I think last year, and it was talking about carbon. And one of the conversations was essentially about carbon farming, but it's how farmers approach carbon sequestration. I can't even say it today, but sequestration and carbon capture and everything. And one of the discussions, I suppose, it wasn't even a debate, but it was really just a conversation to say, do they keep those credits for themselves, or do they sell them as a form of a long-term, I suppose, rent roll or income to other industries? And the reason that was a question is that many people in the agricultural supply chains are kicking the carbon burden down the supply chain a bit. So whether that be fertilizer or chemicals or transport or whatever, and they were saying that there's a possibility that a lot of farmers are going to have to carry a lot of that carbon as the primary producer, the carbon burden. Is that part? So do you try and help farmers work through that supply chain, or politically have to have those discussions?
Absolutely. At both ends of the lens, we do, and we don't pretend that we've got all the answers, let alone one answer, because we don't think there is one answer. Some of the things that we encourage farmers to think about is, for instance, if a free trade agreement with the EU was signed off, or something that's definitely in that draft at the moment, is our carbon emissions. And that means that you wouldn't ideally want to be having already sold off your carbon credits, because you would want to use those to be able to get your product to market. Things to think about in that equation, and we regularly have information available on this, and new information through webinars and new experts. And we're not the only ones, of course, but the type of farming that you do. So, for instance, certain types of farming tends to be more intense in terms of the methane that is created, or the carbon that's generated through that practice. And again, understanding the inputs that you're using and whether they're coming with high or low carbon profiles is important as well. And thinking about how that stacks up for you. So, for instance, at the moment, we think there's great advantages for farmers to be able to not have sold themselves out of carbon credit market too far ahead. You want to retain the option to be able to make that call, I think, as strongly as you can. One of the things that I learnt at our own roadshow on Thursday is that, did you know, part of Tesla's profitability is selling their carbon credits to other auto manufacturers? So it's really interesting to think about that's part of their business model. And while the carbon market is working as it is, they're doing incredibly well. So what this means for us is, before we even think about selling our credits, one thing we do know 100% is getting to zero net carbon, or as close as possible to, is a no-brainer. You know, that is something you want to be doing for your own profitability and sustainability and that of our planet, as well as your own potential market access and profitability diversification as well.
And do you think it's going to? So one of the things we talk about in this podcast is farm. A lot of the farm business, which often comes down to everything ends up getting measured in dollars eventually. And I'm a farmer, and I've got a big operation, and I'm happy to go. I love the idea of going to zero net carbon, but I need to put in a plan over the next decade to achieve that, and how I'm going to go about that. So in other words, I've got to build this into my financial plans and models over the next decade, at least, I assume. So is there, when you're connecting experts, are there people that can help farmers put those plans together? So like okay, this is where I'm at. This is where I need to get to. These are the big, broad milestones I've got to try to achieve. So a farmer can either allow for it in opportunity costs, or actively, use capital to move towards that point. Absolutely.
And what I will say before we get into the detail is, this is something that farmers are grappling with right now, and it's new, and there's a huge amount of investment being invested through the research development corporations for agriculture. which is a co-investment by government and farmers, as you know. There's serious dollars there. There's serious dollars around the world. But part of what would make all of this a lot easier is if there was a clear national target for agriculture and other sectors so that we could all be working on a level playing field and understand our goals and our timeframes and be able to manage that decision-making and investment framework with confidence. Certainty is really important. At the moment, there are a number of great sources for farmers to go to. So they're commodity representative bodies, their research and development corporations are designed to support them through this and tackle the biggest challenges, and also those nutty little stones in the shoe for their sector and commodity as well. Identifying those is really important to do at a sectoral level. Banks and financial institutions are really good at this because they have a vested interest in the long-term profitability of, if you're listening to this, your farm today. It's really important we're all working together. And of course, Farmers for Climate Action has a great toolkit on our website, which can point you to some great people. Things are moving all the time, so we're trying to stay ahead of the curve, and it's really important that we do so. There's also some things that we're focused on addressing, such as large-scale generation in renewable in regions and how that's working, and more importantly, in places not quite working. Our farmers are really pro-renewables, but there's some real challenges that they're telling us about that we're working hard to address as well. So it's not about being ideological about it. It's about tackling it like farmers tackle every other big challenge they face, with really open mind and business principles.
And I think if you look at it from a business principles point of view, that, you know, I'm thinking here when I was listening to you, it's about not kicking the can. So if you kick the can down a road too far with this, is that it's going to cost more. These things tend to cost more into the future. So, for example, you mentioned these influences within the ecosystem of the industry that might come down to bear. So, for example, banks and superannuation funds now have, I think, through shareholders, and I'm not across this completely, you're probably better at this than me, but have essentially some climate or some carbon expectations by the shareholders of these companies. Now, those will, one way or another, end up on the clients. So you might not, let's say, be doing much in this space, but the bank says in order to get money, you have to meet these climate or these carbon benchmarks because we need it for our business or whatever. So do you feel that it's, from a farmer, even if you say, okay, this is new to me, I don't know anything about it, I'm worried about it, but I don't know where to start. Is it better to start early and work your way into this rather than say, I'll let Natalie and the gang tell me how to fix it all in 10 years' time? So,
yeah, it's heartening to know we're not the only ones going through this, but it is something that we're actually overdue to start thinking about. So if you haven't started thinking about it, the right time is now. It is challenging because it can feel very overwhelming. So focusing, I think, on one part of your business first and then moving forward and broadening out, I think, is a great thing to do. But for instance, a lot of, for instance, financial institutions, other businesses, they're all working to ESG or environmental social governance principles. And there's really strict metrics that are being applied to themselves there. So, for instance, banks will think about the amount of money they invest and where that investment is going, that it has to deliver or be aligned to their ESG principles. So we want our farms to be able to align with that. And it makes sense that food producing businesses would align to that because actually they're absolutely needed. And we look after our people and we look after our bit of earth as well. So it makes sense that actually we're best placed to be very aligned to that. It's just about understanding it and getting across this new way of measuring. But it is helpful to know that we're not the only ones grappling with wholly new ways of conceptualising our business and our operations.
Yeah, definitely. So You've done some work with what I call the existing or the incumbent representative organisations like NFF and others. So there's a political advocacy side to Farmers for Climate Action. So can you tell me about some of the wins you've been having in that area? Especially, I know you did something with NFF around climate goals. Does that extend beyond those organisations to state organisations or local members? So how do you advocate in that area, and what are your goals in that? I suppose also I don't call it political side of the industry or advocacy side of the industry.
Sure. Our number one goal is economy-wide climate policies that will unlock a prosperous and sustainable future for farmers and our communities. So we do that actually mostly directly with politicians. So I can tell you that I'm only brand new in the job, but I've had short meetings with the Treasurer, the Minister for Agriculture, some independents, and also with NFF and members, been involved in many meetings there as well. The great thing for us about being a member of the National Farmers Federation is that around that table are state farming organisations, commodity-based representative bodies and others. So it's a really good marketplace of agricultural policy ideas, so to speak. And it's a great place to look at and think about things like, what does sustainability look like long-term, and how can we build that in, strengthen that at the NFF table? We don't always agree. I think that's normal and healthy. We're always have an appetite for extra strong climate policies, but it's important to be listening as much as we're talking, and we really hold ourselves to that. It's important for us that we're bringing people along. We already represent a really significant group of farmers that are aligned to what we're doing, but we know that bringing the rest of the industry along with us isn't going to be done by telling them how it should be and why. It's actually about listening to understanding and being informed by what their concerns or qualms might be. Or sometimes it's not even concerns or qualms. There's this other big issue on the table that they would like to deal with in and on its own right. So, for instance, right now the Murray-Darling Basin is one of those, even though for us it is caused by climate change. There's some clear and present issues that some farmers really only have the bandwidth to deal with, and we respect that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So there is, it's almost like a Venn diagram, don't we?
Yeah.
You've got essentially environment, and as in local environment, like river systems, chemical and fertilizer usage, spray drift, all those sort of environmental concerns really end up overlapping the climate action conversation. So sometimes I'd imagine it'd be fairly hard to separate those two both discussions and outcomes. Would it?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where you sort of learn that a lot of the great puns and cliches in our language are derived from or inspired by farming. So, for instance, the wood for the trees and things like that, where for us, the wood for the trees is about, well, we're dealing with, one drought or one flood or the Murray-Darling Basin as a single issue, but it's part of this really big, huge issue, and we've got to deal with both. But we also recognise that there is something around farmers, around fatigue and disaster, and we understand that there's individuals and families, and there's mental health challenges, and there's also the effort and resilience that it takes to just navigate these challenges, and people have been doing that for a long time. So we also feel that we're playing as a team, and sometimes playing as a team is we go hard because we've got the energy and the resources to do this and to focus on that issue, and we give them space to navigate that immediate challenge as well.
And often traditionally over the many, many decades, the farming regions tend to be represented by the more conservative side of politics, let's say. And this is quite a big generalisation, but it's fairly solid, I think, in most areas. And those organisations have never traditionally been, I suppose, super proactive in the context of climate policy. Do you find that is changing? Or if I'm a farmer and I know that I have an incredibly conservative MP, and they're either being disruptive or just not proactive or helpful in that debate. Is there somewhere where your organisation can help, or is there something that you can help them, create influence for that local MP? Or do you think that's just changing, this idea of a conservative not anti, but a ambivalent climate action local rural MP is something that's changing?
It's a great question. So I think the answer is both. But the truth is we're really overdue for action. So we do encourage farmers that are motivated, and more farmers are motivated to have chats with their local MPs, to reach out to us if they haven't already, so that we can help support them to feel more confident or more equipped to have that conversation. That's one of the key things that we do, and proud of it. But some of the things we do as well, you might have heard a few weeks ago, or just about a month ago, Barnaby Joyce in the Nationals party room. The Nationals, of course, often representing the regional locations where farmers are located, brought to the party room a motion to knock the zero emissions target from the Nationals party. And how many people do you reckon supported him to do that in the Nationals party room?
I've got no idea. It sounds like something. Yeah. Okay. You got to surprise me now.
I'm going to surprise you, because what we got was a hell of a lot of phone calls during that time, a couple of days of those meetings. And the motion got put forward a few times, as I understand it, and on all occasions received not one vote of support. So what we knew was that the MPs in that room wanted to be supported and to understand the implications. They are taking responsibility for making sure that they've got evidence-based information in front of them, but they're really open and listening to constituents. We really encourage and admire that. We think that this isn't an ideological issue. It's simply about how do we be an economic superpower in agriculture, not just today and in the past, but in the future as well.
And is that because often this type of debate has always been, traditionally it's been argued like a zero-sum game. In other words, you've got to stop doing this so we can do this. And then people have obviously got their backs up because that's their living. We've seen this in the, talking about Barnaby, he represents coal areas as well, I think, so there's this, I'm fighting for people's livings here, so they can either have a living or we can have climate change, but you can't have both. But in reality, that's a little over dualistic and simplistic. Do you think the debate is moving beyond this zero-sum game with climate action?
I really hope so. I think one thing I don't want to discount is change is hard. Absolutely, you need a huge amount of bandwidth to move towards and test a whole new operating system, even if it's incremental. So I want to acknowledge that's real, and that's difficult, and not everyone's ready to move at the same time. What I also want to say, though, is I think it's responsibility of government to support and help provide information and extension to sectors to do that. So when governments are setting new legislation or policy, we want them to do the right thing for the right reason and to bring people along, but to do it understanding the truth of the picture. And everyone that we've spoken to that is moving towards climate smart agriculture, what we learn is that it's more profitable, not an either or zero-sum game. It's actually about doing the best thing and structuring your farm business for more profitability, great biodiversity, and also so you and your family can farm long-term if that's your business unit. And often you'll hear things where people make changes because there's quality of life implications that benefit them as well. For us, we want to support the farmers themselves. The absolute best outcomes for us have a triple P result. So profit, planet, and people benefit.
Yeah, there's a Venn diagram in itself on the website, isn't it? When you're talking about the profitability, and I often found, we talk about that lifestyle on the farm, and I often found back in the early days. So when I was still farming, back in the 90s, it was really almost like the pinnacle of land care, especially around when we were. So we were doing a lot of we were building a lot of grade banks across areas of paddocks, and we were planting trees at regular intervals in bandwidths up and down our large paddocks. Now that was good it's good for everything. So everything from beneficial bugs through to spray drifts through to protection for livestock to everything. But you're talking about the lifestyle. It also looked great, and it was nice driving around your farm with just so many plantations of trees everywhere. So you're quite right. Sometimes it is a little bit beyond just the black and white stuff as well.
It really is feel-good stuff. And I've had the privilege of being on the board of Landcare Australia for a while, and it's just incredible what can be done. What I will say, though, just like when we think about the challenge of recruiting new people to agriculture because they simply don't have that bridge or an understanding, the fact that as a sector, one thing we are is very humble. We don't toot our own horn, and often we don't even talk too much. So often we're not talking up all the benefits. We've got that quiet satisfaction, and you can sort of visualize all the people driving past that beautiful image you described just now, and just having that quiet nod to themselves and thinking, yep, that was good. That's looking good. Community pride. We've created some really tangible, measurable benefits. But often we're not evangelical, for want of a better word, around spreading the word and letting people know what we're doing and why. So often we think part of what we can do is actually help people call that out in a way that feels appropriate for them, such as a farmer in focus piece or case study. Let government know so that they can know this is a good thing to invest in again, and to share and replicate elsewhere, and to get people on conferences or things like that where we can share that information more broadly.
Yeah, and I reckon if you go into any district, like I kept thinking, the whole time you've been talking, I've been thinking, okay, if I went and had an audit sometime, and let's say there's this magic climate audit that you had to do, like you always have to fill out a form. I don't know if you've got give blood, you have to fill in this form every time before you question, every time you don't have blood. Anyway, so say it's like one of those for the climate. I reckon so many farmers would be like, are you doing this? Yeah, done that. Yeah, you're doing this? Yeah, I've done that. Yeah, have you done that? Oh, yeah, we're doing that already. And I think you were talking about the gap. You were talking about the gap between where they are now and where, let's say, zero net carbon is. And I actually think if farmers went through the process of working out where they're already at, I think both auditors and farmers would be surprised how far down the road most farm businesses already are.
Oh, I'm nodding vigorously because one of the things that I love to ask when I've got a panel of farmers and they're doing great things is, do you have any regrets or anything you wish you knew before you started out on this? And everyone always gives exactly the same answer. And that is, I wish I did a benchmarking of a carbon audit benchmark. And because actually they realised that saved a huge amount of carbon already, and, they've got their profitability, they can measure that. But what we haven't done is that first benchmarking of the carbon to really capture all the true reductions. And they sort of feel excited about what it would have been.
Yeah, definitely. Look, you look at grain farming alone in Australia. So, zero tillage really sort of peaked late 90s. That's when it was just like it wasn't unusual. It became just normal to have a zero till system within your farm system. Now, you think since then, the last 20 plus years, 25 years, how much carbon has been retained and captured just through that simple productivity change within farm businesses, soil health, carbon. So the soils of the 80s and the soils of the 2023 would be radically different, I'd imagine, across Australia.
Oh, absolutely. And this is the thing. We've been an early adopter of new technology and innovation. It's made incredible sense, again, on that triple P line that we talked about earlier, but it won't be captured in any reductions. And in fact, one of the things that I'm really aware of is that actually on paper, as part of the national emissions profile, it might look like agriculture's going backwards, as the electrification of the energy sector and the transport sector moves forward, because they will reduce in the total share of our national pie of emissions. And agriculture, although we're only 15% or less now, will look like it's a greater share, even though we will be reducing also. But because we're not subject to as much incentives and subsidies, we will perhaps not look, it won't reflect the effort that we're taking and the investment we're making of our own money. So part of the reason why we're really keen on national targets is that will strengthen our ability to ask for that extension dollar or subsidies in the right places to support our adjustment.
That makes a lot of sense. So you got to read into the numbers carefully. So I'm just thinking, I'm a farmer. I'm listening to this, and I go, okay, love what Natalie's saying here. You guys do a lot of education. You have a bunch of resources. So I'm listening to this, and I go, wow, this is the first time I've ever heard of Farmers for Climate Action, or I've seen them around, but I've never really dug in. But I really want to get involved. How do they get started on their journey with the resources your organisation does, and how do they actually start taking action themselves? So how would they engage with your organisation one way or another to make a start?
Well, first of all, I would say you could not be more welcome. Head to our website, farmersforclimateaction.org.au, and click the Join Us button. Join us. We ask all farmer members to make a contribution. Doesn't have to be financial. It's what you decide it should be. So you might give us a quote about why climate action suits you. You might make a tax-deductible donation. Anything over $2 is tax-deductible. Or you might participate by downloading some of our toolkits or go on the newsletter, a mailing list and things like that. There's definitely no rush about it. Please join, because the more farmers that join and show that they're standing up for climate action, the stronger our ask is. So just by joining, you strengthen our ability to support you at the national level. We're really keen to do that and keep improving how we do that. But also you can feel free to email us and let us know what of our offerings suits you best, or if there's something else we should be exploring to support you. It's a two-way conversation, and it's something that we're really interested in. And unlike traditional farmer organisations, we really recognise that everyone's at a different stage of priority in their life. So the amount of time or money you give us doesn't necessarily reflect how important climate action is for you. You might request a free corflute to hang on your fence and to show your community that you're a farmer for climate action. We'd love to send one out to you. And we'd also love for you to participate in the way that's right for you in the work that we do, or to support your voice going to your local MP and beyond.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, if it's something as, okay, I want to show to my community that I'm a farmer for climate action, and I can put something on my front gate. Or I've never written to my local MP, but this is really important to me. You can help them with that as well.
You bet. You bet.
Okay.
And it really does make a difference.
So if I want to get something going in my local community, farmers have, really strong local communities, and I go, okay, this is something that really ticks a lot of boxes for me, and I want to try and advocate for this. Can they advocate for farmers for climate action within their community? Is there support in that way?
Absolutely. So we've been invited to lots of communities. There's some really active places for FCA, but there's also communities where we're just starting and we're excited to do that. It might be that you're already part of a group and you want to invite us down or up to come and speak and share some information. It might be that you invite us to jump on a virtual meeting and that suits your community better. We're small, but we're incredibly active. So we're definitely up for doing these sorts of things. For example, I'll be in a cafe in Mudgee for 3 hours, inviting any farmer within a 50k radius that wants to come and have a cuppa and a chat. It's about how do we build those movements from the ground up and understand what's important to those communities.
So when you have those chats, and I'm sure you have a lot of really interesting chats when you do that, whether it be at a community level or at a one-on-one level in a cafe and budgie, but what are the biggest, so you sit down and you get someone sit down and go, look, Natalie, thanks for taking my time, but I'm really worried about this, or they have this. What do you think of the things? I've got two questions for you. What are the biggest thing you find that farmers are concerned about in this whole space? And what are the biggest myths you come across in the context of climate action and farmers?
I think it's early for me to really say that I'm identifying trends, but what I will say is that climate is a really big worry on people's minds. And that can be for a variety of reasons. It could be being really nervous about, if we are regulated, what does that look like and what's my ability to survive? Because I don't know that. And the worst thing about feeling imminent but not there is you can't examine it and get a sense of it at the moment. The other piece is I notice that as soon as you talk about what's worrying you and you realise you're not alone, gosh, that halves the load, because there's always people already working on it and suddenly you're part of a genuinely massive movement. We don't have to do any of it on our own. So please join the movement, because the more there are of us, the more we share the load together. And there's always someone able to step up to, whether it's have a chat to a journalist, an MP, whether it's actually participating and getting some support for some on-farm adjustment, whether it's getting some information like we did last Thursday around on-farm electrification and what that looks like and what some of our questions and concerns. Everyone walks away feeling really positive and really energised and less worried, because we're finally doing something about it. And chats do matter and they do count. And I feel pages of notebooks, just listening and taking things down and seeing where the trends are. In terms of myths, I think the biggest myth that we've got is that this is going to go away. In fact, we're worse off if we don't get some certainty in the game. So, for instance, a lot of people might be watching the UK and see there's some moves towards going backwards on the legislated targets. Actually, the industry that's supposed to benefit has come out and slammed it, the automotive industry, because they've actually invested a lot to meet these targets and they're satisfied and comfortable that they can do this and be profitable, and actually changing things on them changes their ability to navigate their business and adjust with confidence. So getting some long-term goals and sticking to them, and then investing in supporting farmers to adjust and change so we leave no one behind, is a no-brainer from where we're sitting.
So I've got one more question before I let you go, because I know you've got a flight to catch, Natalie. So when you're not, you're a busy girl, busy lady. That sounds patronising. Sorry, busy lady. And but what do you do when you're not advocating? Because I look at your LinkedIn profile, your CV, and you're very passionate and busy in advocacy. So what do you do when you're not doing that? So what do you do in your downtime, Natalie?
Well, I do get upset a lot because I am a crazy workaholic. So I love sports. I've just put on my Collingwood scarf because I'm currently a premier and proud of it.
Oh my God.
Very passionate about lots and lots of different sports. I'm very privileged that I live close to the beach. So I'm always walking. I'm a walkaholic, if you like. But I also love just being near water, whether it's a river, whether it's the bay. I think water is so beautiful, and we're so lucky in Australia. I literally go on bushwalks and I have favourite trees, and I will almost hug them, that's for sure. I love just contemplating and doing some strategic thinking while I'm walking. And I notice that my best strategic thinking comes when I'm noticing nature the most, and the sounds of birds and rustle of the leaves and all the rest. So I feel so privileged to live in this country and to experience it and soak it in. I also really love people. So I'm really privileged in this job, but also in my personal life to have amazing people around me that you know what it's like. You collect people along the way and they become very dear friends, whether you've met them at work or play. And that's a really wonderful part of my life. And I think if I had twice as many days in the week, I know that I'd fill them with wonderful things. And honestly, there would be a lot of work in there because I'm really passionate about what we do. But there'd be lots of great conversations, great people, and time in nature as well, I reckon.
I think the Japanese culture, I can't actually remember the word for it, but they call it forest bathing. And I love that idea. So they have water bathing and forest bathing.
Yeah, and I can just think of the dappled light coming through the trees, and that's the ultimate, isn't it?
It is. It's hard to be stressed in the bush, isn't it? Thank you very much for joining us today, Natalie, and I'll let you go and catch your plane that you've got to get to now. But I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed that conversation, and I thank you very much for taking the time out to talk to us today.
Thanks so much for having me, David. Really appreciate it.
Thanks again for listening to Boots Off Log On. Our aim with this podcast is to give you access to the best minds in agricultural business and to help your farm business thrive. So if you have any feedback or suggestions for the podcast, including people you believe I should interview, please email bootsofflogon@agrimaster.com.au. If you like this episode, please take time to share it on social media, or even better, directly with at least one friend today. And take the time to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, as it really helps us reach more farm businesses like you. As always, if you'd like to know more about AgriMaster Farm Business Management Software and Services, you can find us at agrimaster.com.au. I look forward to speaking to you next time. Thank you.